Imagine waking up one morning, looking out at your property, and realizing that 35 brand new homes complete with driveways, lawns, and white picket fences are sitting on your land. No contracts, no payments, no permission. Just strangers. Living on the soil your family worked, thinking it belonged to them. That's exactly what happened when a ruthless HOA decided they could outsmart me, build without my consent, and bury my rights under a pile of paperwork and arrogance. But what they didn't know is that my land held a secret one they never thought to ask about, and one that would change everything the moment I decided to act. You see, long before the HOA pushed their way in, this land wasn't just farmland. It was the site of an old dam my grandfather built, a massive barrier holding back thousands of gallons of water that ran off the surrounding hills. Over the years, the dam had become a quiet part of the property, a sleeping giant. The HOA never researched it, never asked why the ground sloped the way it did, and never thought about what could happen if that water was set free. They only saw flat earth, dollar signs, and an opportunity to cram as many homes as possible into a development they could control. At first, I tried the legal route. I sent letters, I brought out the deed, I showed maps dating back decades proving the land was mine. But every time I confronted them, they brushed me off with fake smiles and condescending voices, insisting their lawyers already cleared the project. The arrogance was unreal. They believed their paperwork and city connections were stronger than my ownership rights. They thought I was just one man, too small to fight a machine as powerful as them. What they didn't understand was that this land wasn't just property, it was a legacy, and legacies aren't something you roll over and surrender. The more they ignored me, the angrier I became. Every new house that went up was like a slap in the face. Every time I saw workers pour foundations or families move in, it burned deeper. 35 homes. 35 insults stacked on top of my heritage. And then, one night, standing by the dam with the moonlight shimmering on the water's surface, I realized something crystal clear. They had built their kingdom on a ticking time bomb. Because here's the thing about water, it doesn't care about paperwork, property lines, or HOA bylaws. It only cares about gravity. And all it would take was one decision, one turn of a wheel, one release of pressure. And everything they had stolen from me would be swallowed whole. So I waited. I waited until the last roof was nailed down, until the last moving truck left, until the HOA president stood there bragging at their ribbon-cutting ceremony about the community they had created. I smiled politely when he shook my hand, biting back the truth that the community they built wasn't on solid ground, it was on borrowed time. And then, when the perfect moment came, I climbed to the top of that dam. My hands gripped the rusted metal wheel that controlled the floodgate, a relic that had sat untouched for years. With every turn, the water roared louder, pressing forward like an army begging to be unleashed. I could feel the vibration under my feet, the unstoppable force waiting for freedom. The wheel groaned as I cranked it open, flakes of rust snapping off and tumbling into the dark water below. At first, it was just a hiss, a thin stream bursting through like air escaping a balloon. But then the dam came alive. The pressure surged, the stream widened, and the hiss turned into a roar so loud it rattled my chest. Water thundered through the gates, churning into a violent river that clawed at the earth with unstoppable force. The sleeping giant had awakened. From the top of the ridge, I could see it rushing downhill, ripping through the brush and following the slope directly toward the pristine neighborhood the HOA had stamped onto my land. Streetlights flickered against the night, illuminating the rows of identical homes lined up like dominoes in the path of destruction. I almost laughed at the irony how perfect everything looked just seconds before chaos arrived. The first wave hit like a freight train. Driveways disappeared under foaming water, flower beds ripped out by their roots, and picket fences snapped like toothpicks. Cars floated like toys, alarms blaring uselessly as the current carried them away. Windows shattered, doors slammed open. And the quiet little suburb they built turned into a scene straight out of a disaster movie. And all of it was powered by the very thing they chose to ignore, the dam they didn't even know existed. I stood there gripping the railing, feeling the spray on my face as the flood devoured everything in its path. The HOA president's voice echoed in my head, smug and dismissive, calling me misinformed when I showed him my deed. Well, there was no misunderstanding anymore. The water was my witness, my judge, and my executioner. It didn't care about his board meetings or bylaws, it only knew the truth. Some homeowners tried to scramble, wading through knee-deep torrents, clutching their kids and pets as they ran toward higher ground, but there was no stopping it. The current tore at foundations, washing away soil until the houses tilted and cracked. Entire walls collapsed, collapsing with sickening crashes as the water punched through like fists of steel. It was raw power, untamed and merciless. And I didn't look away, not once. Because this wasn't just destruction, it was justice. Every drop of that flood was a reminder that this land wasn't theirs to take, and no board of arrogant strangers could ever rewrite history. They thought their signatures were stronger than my roots, but paper burns, ink fades, and water always finds its way home. The next morning, the neighborhood looked unrecognizable. Streets that once gleamed with fresh pavement were buried in mud and debris. Homes stood half submerged, their walls buckled, their interiors gutted like hollow shells. The OS proud? Little development, the one they flaunted as their crown jewel, had been reduced to a swampy graveyard in less than a night. I walked the edges of the flood zone as dawn broke, boots sinking into the wet earth, every step squelching like the land itself was breathing again. The silence was eerie, broken only by the occasional creak of collapsing wood or the distant wail of someone realizing everything they owned was gone. For the first time in months, I felt the weight on my chest ease. The land was mine again. Not perfect, not untouched, but free. Of course, the HOA wasn't about to accept defeat quietly. Their president stormed toward me, shoes ruined, suit drenched, screaming about lawsuits and liability. His voice cracked with panic, not authority, as he accused me of sabotage, of endangering lives. But even as he spat his fury, I noticed the shift in his eyes. He wasn't talking to me as if I were beneath him anymore. He was talking to me as if I was the one in control, the one with the upper hand. And that's exactly how it was. Because I knew the truth. Every structure, every house, every single nail driven into this soil was built without my consent. They had no legal claim, no right to the ground their feet were sinking into. They were squatters dressed as homeowners, thieves hiding behind paperwork. And now, with their kingdom washed away, their entire scheme was unraveling right before them. By noon, authorities began to arrive. Sirens pierced the air as fire trucks, police cars, and emergency crews lined the muddy roads. Helicopters hovered overhead, capturing the devastation for the news. Reporters swarmed in with cameras, their microphones shoved in faces, demanding to know how a disaster like this could happen. And that's when the real cracks started to show. Homeowners turned on the HOA, shouting questions the board had no answers for. Why didn't you know about the dam? Why didn't you verify the land rights? How could you let us buy homes on property that wasn't even yours? Every angry voice was another nail in their coffin. I didn't have to say much, just stood there with the original deed in my hand, the one they mocked me for showing before. Now, under the blinding lights of TV cameras, that same piece of paper burned through their lives like fire. And as the floodwaters slowly began to settle, leaving behind a wasteland of broken dreams, I realized this was only the beginning. The HOA had built 35 homes on land they didn't own, and every family, every lender, every insurer tied to those homes was about to demand answers. What they unleashed wasn't just a flood of water, it was a flood of lawsuits, bankruptcies, and investigations that would drown them long after the water receded. Courtrooms filled faster than the floodwaters ever had. Within weeks, the story exploded beyond the county headlines, screamed about the HOA that built on stolen land and the dam that took it all back. News anchors debated it nightly, legal experts dissected it, and ordinary people cheered the downfall of the arrogant board that thought they could bulldoze over ownership rights. For once, the world wasn't against me. It was watching the HOA collapse under the weight of their own lies. Homeowners who once looked at me with suspicion now demanded justice right alongside me. They realized they had been duped, sold homes on foundations of deceit. I saw their anger shift from me to the people who had orchestrated this mess, the HOA board, the developers, and the corrupt officials who signed off without a second glance. The betrayal was too big to ignore. Families who lost everything weren't asking me for answers. They were demanding them from the very people who had stood at that ribbon-cutting ceremony bragging about their community. The lawsuits stacked high, like bricks in a wall closing in on the HOA. Lenders froze accounts. Insurance companies refused payouts, and the city scrambled to explain how it approved permits without verifying the land's rightful ownership. Their empire wasn't just cracking, it was collapsing piece by piece. And I made sure to be there at every hearing, every deposition, standing tall with the deed in my hand, reminding them and the world that this land had never been theirs to claim. Meanwhile, investigators began digging deeper. And the deeper they dug, the uglier it got. Backroom deals between HOA board members and local officials came to light. Kickbacks, forged documents. Shady construction contracts rushed through without oversight. What started as a fight over my land was now exposing an entire web of corruption. The same people who called me a nuisance were now fighting tooth and nail to keep themselves out of prison. Through it all, I stayed calm. I didn't need to scream or beg or justify myself anymore. The flood had already spoken louder than words ever could. Every camera pointed at me, every microphone shoved toward me. I only repeated one truth. They built on land that wasn't theirs, and nature took it back. But while the HOA crumbled publicly, I knew this battle wasn't over. Power like theirs doesn't just vanish, it claws, it schemes, it tries to rebuild. And even as they sat red-faced in courtrooms, I could see it in their eyes. They were plotting a way out, a way back, a way to twist the story in their favor. They'd already lost their homes, their money, and their reputation. The only thing they had left was desperation, and desperate people are dangerous. And that's when the smear campaign began. Billboards popped up on highways with my face plastered across them, calling me a reckless vigilante who endangered families. Local papers, some still cozy with City Hall, ran editorials painting me as a bitter landowner who let his anger flood innocent lives. Even my mailbox filled with anonymous letters accusing me of playing God, warning me that people don't forget a man who destroys homes. It was obvious the HOA, or what was left of it, was behind it. They couldn't win in court, so they tried to win in the shadows, twisting public opinion. They thought if they dragged my name low enough, the lawsuits, the headlines, and the investigations might tilt back in their favor. But every lie they spread, every accusation they hurled, only made the truth shine brighter. Because no matter how hard they tried, they couldn't erase the one fact that cut through all their noise. Those homes were never supposed to be there. Still, the pressure was relentless. Old friends stopped calling. Strangers whispered when I walked through town. Some nights, I'd sit by the dam listening to the hum of the water and wonder if I'd unleash something bigger than I could control, not just a flood of water, but a flood of enemies. But then I'd remember the smirk on the HOA president's face the day he told me, "You don't matter here." That sentence burned in my head like a brand, and it reminded me why I couldn't back down, no matter how ugly things got. Behind closed doors, they were growing desperate. Rumors swirled about secret meetings, about the board funneling what little money they had left into lobbying city officials, trying to rewrite zoning maps, trying to claw back some angle of leverage. They even sent private investigators sniffing around my property, hoping to dig up dirt, anything they could twist into a weapon. But they found nothing. My family kept records, my land was clean, and unlike them, I didn't build lies. What they didn't realize was that the tide had already turned. Whispers of federal interest started circulating. Word that investigators from higher up were beginning to pull threads on fraud, wire transfers, and interstate money trails. The HOA wasn't just losing a fight over stolen land, they were now standing on the edge of something much darker, something criminal. And the more they clawed at me, the more they drew attention to themselves. But I knew better than to relax. A wounded animal is most dangerous when cornered. And the HOA wasn't done lashing out. The first real threat came quietly. A note, stuffed under my front door in the dead of night, scrawled in jagged handwriting, "Stop or you'll regret it." No signature, no trace. Just raw malice on a crumpled sheet of paper. I didn't call the police. What would they do? File it away? Add it to the stack? Shrug? No, this was bigger than one piece of paper. This was the HOA showing its teeth. Then came the sabotage. One morning I found the fence by my livestock torn open, posts yanked out as if someone had used a truck to rip them free. My animals scattered across the pasture, shaken but alive. Another night, the locks on my tool shed were smashed, the contents overturned, equipment ruined with sugar poured into gas tanks. These weren't random vandals. This was targeted, a message. They wanted me rattled, broken, maybe even gone. But they underestimated me. My family had worked this land for generations, through storms, droughts, and every kind of hardship. You don't scare a man off his roots with a few cowardly stunts. Instead of fear, their attacks lit a fire in me. I doubled my watch, kept records of every detail, and waited. Because one thing I knew for certain: people that desperate eventually slip up. And they did. It started with whispers in town. Folks who used to keep their distance began talking again, sharing things they'd overheard. A board member spotted meeting late at night with a contractor who wasn't on any payroll. Another caught on camera buying burner phones in bulk. Even a delivery driver mentioned seeing unmarked vans parked near my property, idling with their lights off. They weren't just trying to ruin my name anymore. They were circling, planning something bigger. What they didn't realize was that the more they pressed, the more people began to side with me. Neighbors who once looked the other way now offered information. Reporters dug deeper, hungry for the next twist in the story. And every shred of evidence pulled them closer to exposure. But still, I could feel the tension tightening, like a rope stretching to its limit. The smear campaigns, the threats, the sabotage, it all pointed to one conclusion. They weren't finished. They were preparing to make a move, a final strike. To silence me before the walls of justice came crashing down on them. And when that strike came, I knew I had to be ready. It happened on a night when the sky was heavy with thunder, clouds rolling in like an omen. I was sitting by the damn lantern flickering beside me. When I heard it, the crunch of tires on gravel where no car should have been, my gut tightened. Instantly, I killed the light and slipped into the shadows, every instinct sharp as a blade. 3 figures stepped out of a dark SUV, their voices low but urgent. They weren't neighbors. They weren't officials. These were hired hands brought in to do what the HOA board no longer had the spine to handle themselves. One carried a crowbar, another a gas can. The third pulled something from his jacket that glinted even in the dim moonlight. My land wasn't just under siege anymore, it was under attack. They moved with purpose, heading straight toward the shed where I kept my equipment, muttering about sending a message. I felt the blood rush in my ears. A message. After everything they'd done, after the smear campaigns and the sabotage, they thought they could scare me into submission. With thugs in the night? They didn't realize the mistake they'd made stepping foot here. I stayed low, silent, watching their every move. They kicked the shed door, splintering the wood, then splashed fuel across the floor. The smell of gasoline cut through the damp air, sharp and unmistakable. One strike of a match and months of work, generations of tools, would be nothing, but ash. That was when I stepped out. My voice cut through the storm like a gunshot. This land doesn't belong to you, and neither does a single thing on it. They froze, heads snapping toward me, caught between surprise and rage. The one with the crowbar tightened his grip. The one with the match sneered, but none of them moved right away. Maybe it was the way I stood. Maybe it was the confidence in my voice. Or maybe, just maybe, it was the fact that I wasn't holding back anymore. The tension was thick enough to choke on. Lightning split the sky, lighting up their faces twisted with the desperation of men who knew they were losing everything. They weren't just here to scare me. They were here to destroy me. And for the first time, I realized just how far the HOA was willing to go to protect their empire of lies. But what they didn't realize was that I had been waiting for this moment. The man with the crowbar stepped forward first, his boots sinking into the wet soil, his face shadowed but his intent clear. He swung it lazily at his side, metal clanging against the rocks as if daring me to flinch. The other two fanned out, circling like wolves closing in on prey. But I wasn't preying out on my own land. "Walk away," I warned, my voice steady, unshaken by the storm building overhead. "This ground has taken bigger men than you." They laughed, but it wasn't the kind of laugh that came from confidence. It was the nervous kind. The laugh of men who needed to convince themselves. They weren't already in over their heads. The one with the gas can set it down, cracking his knuckles, his eyes darting nervously toward the dam. He didn't know the land like I did. He didn't understand how quickly a mistake out here could turn fatal. The crowbar swung up, a gleam of steel against lightning, and came crashing toward me. Instinct took over. I sidestepped, letting the weight of his own swing throw him off balance, then shoved him hard into the mud. His weapon clattered to the ground, swallowed instantly by muck. Before he could scramble up, I pressed my boot into his chest, pinning him down with the weight of the land itself. The other two surged forward, but that was when the sky answered. A bolt of lightning ripped open the night, followed instantly by a roar of thunder so violent it rattled the dam beneath us. The storm had come alive, and with it the river swelled, water pressing harder against the old stone barrier. Every drop of rain fed the beast waiting behind it, a reminder of who truly held power here. "You think I'm your enemy?" I shouted over the downpour, my voice carried by the wind. "No, the land is your enemy. You built your lies on it, and it will never forgive you." They hesitated, their bravado faltering as the rain pelted down, as the pinned man gasped under my boot. Fear crept into their eyes, not fear of me, but of something bigger, something untamable. They realized this wasn't a fight they could win with fists or fire, but hesitation is dangerous in men like that. Because when they falter, they grow reckless, and recklessness always spills blood. The man with the match lunged first, desperation twisting his face as he drove forward, arm cocked like he meant to stab instead of strike. His boots slipped in the mud, but momentum carried him, the glint of steel flashing as lightning cracked overhead. I caught his wrist mid-swing, the force jarring through my arm, and twisted hard. The knife tumbled from his grip, lost instantly in the rising water pooling across the ground. He screamed, more from shock than pain, but I shoved him back into the mud where he scrambled like a rat. That left a third broad-shouldered, veins bulging in his neck, the kind of man used to intimidation. He didn't hesitate. He barreled into me with the full weight of his frame, slamming me against the slick railing of the dam. The iron groaned under the impact, rain sheeting down between us as we grappled, every movement a struggle of will and raw force. His breath reeked of rage, his teeth clenched like he'd already decided I wasn't walking away from this night. But this was my ground, my dam, my storm. I shoved my forehead into his, stunning him just long enough to twist free, and the river roared beneath us like it was calling my name. Out of the corner of my eye, I saw the first man clawing in the mud for his crowbar, the second coughing and spitting as he tried to crawl away, and the third stumbling back with murder still written across his face. And then it happened. The storm reached its breaking point. A thunderclap shook the valley, and with it came a deep groaning crack from the dam itself, a sound I knew all too well. The floodgates, still strained from the night I'd opened them, had been holding under pressure. But now, with the rain pouring and the river swollen, the old stone walls trembled as if they were seconds from tearing loose again. The men froze, fear cutting through their rage. They looked from me to the water, eyes wide, realizing where they stood. They hadn't come to scare a man. They'd come to the edge of a giant's wrath. And I knew right then I didn't have to fight them with fists. The land itself was about to deliver judgment. The crack deepened, echoing like a cannon through the valley, and the ground beneath our feet shuddered. Water sprayed up in violent bursts from between the dam's seams, each jet stronger than the last, like the river itself was clawing for release. The three men spun in panic, their bravado evaporating in an instant. Whatever plan they had died right there, drowned out by the deafening roar of nature's fury. The big one, the brute who had slammed me into the railing, stumbled back, eyes darting to the SUV parked on the ridge. "We need to go," he shouted to the others, voice cracking under the weight of his own fear. But fear makes men clumsy. He slipped in the mud, arms flailing, nearly tumbling straight over the edge before catching himself on the slick metal rail. His face went pale. He had finally realized that this place belonged to no one but the water. The one who'd carried? The match scrambled up to his feet, hands caked in mud, screaming curses that were swallowed by the storm. He bolted toward the SUV, but the path had already begun to flood, torrents racing down like veins of lightning across the ground. He slipped, fell, and clawed his way forward, every inch a battle. The crowbar man was no better. Mud streaked his face as he wrenched himself free from the muck, his eyes wild, darting between me and the dam like a cornered animal. I stood still, letting it all unfold, my chest heaving, rain soaking through. Every layer of me, I didn't need to move. I didn't need to lift a hand. The land was making the choice for me. And then, with one final groan that sounded like the earth itself splitting in two, the dam gave way. The flood tore forward with apocalyptic force, ripping through stone and earth. A wall of water unleashed into the valley below, the ground. Shook so violently it rattled my bones, the roar so loud it swallowed every human scream. I saw the brute vanish in the spray, yanked over the edge in an instant. The others didn't fare better. One swept off his feet, the other clinging to a tree before the current wrenched him away like a twig. The world blurred in chaos, rain, lightning, crashing water, and the thunder of destruction all at once. The homes in the valley didn't stand a chance. The last remnants of the HOA's proud empire were erased in seconds, swallowed whole beneath the surge. And through it all I held my ground, unmoving, a witness to the land reclaiming what was always its own. When the storm finally broke and the waters calmed, the valley was unrecognizable. Where there had once been houses, fences, and manicured lawns, there was now nothing but a wasteland of mud, debris and shattered wood drifting aimlessly. Streetlights were bent like matchsticks, cars stacked on top of one another like discarded toys, and the faint glow of dawn revealed a silence so heavy it pressed down on everything it touched. I stood on the ridge, soaked to the bone, boots caked in sludge, watching steam rise from the broken earth. The air smelled of wet soil and ruin. It was destruction, yes, but also truth laid bare. The HOA's empire, their pride, their lies, it was all gone, erased as if it had never existed. But silence doesn't last long when disaster strikes. By mid-morning, the valley swarmed again with flashing lights. Sirens screamed down the washed-out roads, helicopters thundered overhead, and reporters once more descended with cameras ready, eyes wide at the carnage. Only this time, the story wasn't just about houses lost to water. It was about lives, about hired men who never came home, about a confrontation in the heart of the storm that no one could yet explain. The authorities pulled me aside quickly. Questions fired at me like bullets. Were you involved? Did you know this would happen? What happened to the men who were here last night? Their pens scratched against wet notepads, microphones shoved inches from my face. But I stayed calm, my answers never changed. This is my land. My family's land, they built where they didn't belong. The water reminded them, it was the truth, stripped to its core. But truth and justice don't always walk hand in hand. I saw the doubt in their eyes, the way some of them looked at me like I wasn't a victim anymore, but something else, something dangerous. And maybe they were right. Behind the lines of emergency tape and flashing lights, I saw homeowners again, those who had survived, those who had lost everything twice over now. Their faces twisted with rage and despair, pointing at me, shouting words I couldn't hear over the engines and chaos. To them, I wasn't the man who had been wronged. I was the man who stood when the dam broke, the man who didn't stop it, the man who might have let it happen. And I knew, standing there with mud on my boots and the deed still clutched in my hand, that this fight wasn't over. The water had destroyed the HOA, yes, but in its wake, it had left me standing at the center of a storm far bigger than any flood. The investigations began before the mud had even dried. Federal agents showed up in black SUVs, their shoes sinking into the muck as they surveyed the wreckage with grim expressions. Clipboards, cameras, measuring tools they combed through every inch of the valley like it was a crime scene. And in their eyes, they asked me to walk them through everything, every detail of the night, every action I took. Their questions weren't casual. They were sharp, surgical, designed to trap me if I slipped. When did you first notice the dam weakening? Did you confront the men before or after the structure gave way? Were you aware your actions could accelerate the collapse? Each one cut deeper, not because I was guilty, but because I knew exactly what they were trying to build, a case that shifted the blame from the HOA to me. Lawyers for the surviving board members wasted no time. They filed motion after motion, painting me as a vigilante obsessed with revenge, a man who weaponized nature to settle a grudge. On television, their attorneys stood in front of microphones and spoke of me like I was a menace. This isn't about land rights, they declared. This is about a man who let his anger flood families out of their homes. They twisted everything, turning my silence into guilt, my patience into malice, my justice into crime. But the thing about lies is they don't hold up forever. Reporters dug into the HOA's records, uncovering fraudulent signatures, illegal permits, backroom deals with city officials. Whistleblowers began to step forward, contractors who admitted they were paid under the table, clerks who confessed to being pressured into pushing documents through without review. The deeper they dug, the clearer it became. The HOA had orchestrated one of the most brazen land grabs in the state's history. Still, the spotlight never left me. Was I a hero who defended his legacy, or a criminal who let nature do his dirty work? The public was split, and the courtroom became the stage where that question would be answered. Every hearing was packed, every seat filled with reporters, neighbors, and strangers who wanted to witness the clash of truth and perception. I sat there with the deed in my hands, the same deed my grandfather once carried, the one they mocked me for. And as I looked across the aisle at the remaining board members, their expensive suits ruined by stress and scandal, I realized something. They weren't fighting for their homes anymore. They were fighting for their survival, and men fighting for survival will do anything. The courtroom was a theater of tension, every word echoing louder than the last. The board members sat at their table, their lawyers flanking them like vultures in suits, whispering strategies through clenched teeth. I sat opposite, alone except for the worn folder that held my family's deed, its pages yellowed but powerful enough to silence centuries of lies. The air smelled faintly of paper and sweat, the kind of scent that clings to rooms where lives are about to be rewritten. The prosecution called their witnesses, first contractors, inspectors, even former HOA employees who had turned against their bosses. Each one peeled back another layer of corruption, forged signatures, backdated permits. Bribes slid across tables in dimly lit offices. Every revelation landed like a hammer on the board's crumbling foundation. The jury shifted. In their seats, their faces tightening with every truth dragged into the light. Then came their counterattack. The HOA's attorneys painted me as a bitter landowner obsessed with revenge, a man who weaponized a dam to destroy 35 homes. They showed pictures of the valley after the flood, mud-slicked teddy bears, ruined family photos, cars, piled like corpses, and they asked the jury to imagine how it felt to lose everything. Their voices trembled with false empathy as they pointed at me, calling me the common denominator of all this destruction. And then they brought out something I hadn't expected, grainy footage from a security camera on one of the homes the night the dam gave way. It showed me standing on the ridge, rain lashing down, floodwaters raging below. To them, it was proof that I had stood idle while disaster unfolded. Their lawyer's voice boomed. A man who could have warned, who could have acted, chose instead to watch. Murmurs rippled through the courtroom. For a brief moment, I felt the weight of every eye drilling into me, not as a victim, not as a defender, but as a suspect. But I held my ground. Because I knew the truth. That video wasn't proof of guilt, it was proof of inevitability. The dam didn't break because I stood there, it broke because they had built where they never should have. And when it was my turn to speak, I would remind everyone of that. The judge's gavel cracked through the noise, and the next name was called my name. The courtroom hushed. I rose slowly, the deed still in my hand, my pulse steady despite the storm they tried to stir around me. Because deep down, I understood something the HOA never could. When you stand on the side of truth, no floodwater or lies can wash it away. But I also knew they weren't finished. The HOA had one last card to play, and whatever it was, it wouldn't be clean. The bailiff swore me in, and as I placed my hand on the Bible, the room seemed to lean in closer, waiting for the words that could decide everything. I sat down at the witness stand, the wood creaking beneath me, and set the deed gently on the table as if to remind everyone why we were truly here. The prosecutor started soft, asking about my family's history with the land, how long we'd lived there, the dam my grandfather had built, the records we kept. I spoke clearly, firmly, making sure every word carried the weight of generations. I told them about the letters I sent, the warnings I gave, the times I stood in front of HOA board members only to be laughed out of the room. Each detail painted the picture of a man who had tried every peaceful way before the storm forced the truth into the open. But then came the cross-examination. The HOA's lead attorney rose with a predator's smile, pacing like a wolf sizing up its prey. His first words dripped with venom. "Mr. Walker, isn't it true that you knew the dam was unstable and chose to let it fail?" He threw accusations like stones, each one designed to make me flinch. "Did you or did you not open the floodgates weeks before the collapse? Were you present when the second surge began? Did you make any attempt to warn the families?" "Living below," I answered steady, but he twisted everything. When I said I opened the gates, he framed it as sabotage. When I said I stood at the ridge, he painted it as cold indifference. Even when I explained that the land was mine, deed in hand, he sneered, "So you believe ownership grants you the right to play God?" The jury shifted uneasily, his words hanging heavy in the air, but I refused to falter. I leaned forward, my voice cutting through his theatrics. "No, ownership doesn't give me the right to play God. It gives me the right to protect what's mine. And it gives me the right to defend it against people who thought they were above the law." The courtroom buzzed, whispers rippling through the gallery. The lawyer tried to press harder, but I saw it in his eyes. He was rattled. Every twist, every trap he laid only gave me another chance to bring the focus back where it belonged. On their lies, their fraud, their arrogance. Still, I knew they weren't out of tricks. They'd saved something for last, a weapon they were waiting to unleash at the moment they thought I was strongest. And as the attorney leaned back, whispering to his team, I felt it in my gut. Their final blow was coming. The HOA's attorney rose one last time, his hand clutching a folder so tight his knuckles were white. His voice carried a smugness I hadn't heard all trial. "Your Honor, the defense would like to submit new evidence." The room tensed. The judge motioned him forward. Out came photographs, contracts, and one document they thought would be my undoing, a signed agreement claiming I had once consented to community development on a portion of my land. The lawyer slapped it down like a winning card. "Ladies and gentlemen, this proves the plaintiff knew and approved construction. He's not a victim. He's a partner who turned against his neighbors." Gasps filled the air. The jury leaned, thin eyes wide. For a moment, it felt like the floor beneath me shifted, but I didn't panic, because I knew that paper was just another lie. Calmly, I picked it up and held it to the light. The signature was clumsy, the ink mismatched, and the date fell on a week I wasn't even in the state. I turned to the jury, raising my voice so every word struck clean. "This is exactly how they've operated from the beginning. Forgeries, shortcuts, lies. If they'll fake a contract to save themselves here, imagine what they did to take my land in the first place." The prosecutor seized the moment, calling an expert witness who confirmed the signature was forged. And with that, the HOA's final blow backfired, detonating in their own hands. From there, the trial unraveled for them. One by one, witnesses returned to the stand, admitting the pressure, the intimidation, the fraud. The jury's faces hardened, no longer skeptical but furious. And when deliberations ended, the verdict was swift, guilty of fraud, trespass, and conspiracy. The board members slumped in their seats as the judge ordered restitution, fines, and prison sentences. The homes they had built illegally were condemned, their insurance claims denied, their empire reduced to rubble. And me? I walked out of that courthouse with the deeds still in my hand. Reporters swarmed, cameras flashing, microphones shoved in my face. They wanted a headline. They wanted anger, victory, fire. But all I said was simple. My grandfather built that land with his hands. They tried to steal it with lies. Today the truth won. I returned to my valley weeks later, the floodwaters long gone, the scars of destruction slowly healing. The dam stood quiet, the water behind it calm once more. And as I stood there, overlooking the land that nearly slipped away, I realized sometimes justice doesn't roar like thunder. Sometimes it flows, steady and unstoppable, just like the river itself. And the HOA learned that when you build on ground that isn't yours, sooner or later, the water will wash it all away. And that's how one HOA's greed was drowned by the truth. If you enjoyed this story, hit that like button, subscribe for more jaw-dropping tales, and let me know in the comments, what would you have done if it was your land?